Hey guys, it is Zianni, your favorite Orianna content creator, to talk about the PB changes for Orianna, or more so the buffs that are coming her way. You can see this tweet by SpiderX30 on your screen right now, and we're going to go down this chronologically and just talk about it. So passive damage now scales every level instead of every 3 levels. It is still 10 through 50. A notable thing here is that in the comments he says that is now 1 through 18, whereas it originally capped out at 16. This is still a buff overall, because if you take a look at the way Orianna currently works, is that it scales every 3 levels, and you'd be getting 18 damage at level 4. But with the new system, you'd be at 12 or 14 damage at level 2 and level 3. So even if the numbers are slightly lower than before, because you're hitting them consistently, it is a progressive improvement to your auto attack damage. So this incentivizes you to trade more autos, maybe put a point into E early on to trade autos, or just take this into more aggressive matchups with erick. Overall, I think this is a pretty good change because it does give you a little bit more impact in the laning phase. But the real meat of the situation here is the Q. The Q pass-through damage changed from negative 10% per target up to negative 60% to negative 30% flat. So this has a lot of ramifications on the way that Orianna plays. The thing that I instantly think of when I am thinking about this is her wave clear. Because before, if you queued the entire minion wave, you're doing only 40% damage to some of these minions. But with the way it works now, you're basically doing 70% damage after the first minion to the entire wave. So it helps with wave clear because you can now do QEQ and clear the wave maybe a level or 2 faster. We'd have to check on the PBE and actually play it to find out. But a lot of reasons on why Orianna players run out of mana quickly is because they will do the QWQ, because they want to one-shot the wave for tempo, and then because you're using your W for upwards of 110 mana, you're basically investing 250 mana push a wave, but if you QEQ, you're basically using like 150. But this does negatively impact your damage output, because if you are hitting only one target before the enemy champion, you are straight up just losing 30% of the damage on the Q. Now, because there's so many scenarios in which Orianna will throw her Q through minions, you could argue that this is basically always going to be a buff. Because if you were playing versus somebody who's intelligent, why would you stand off to the side versus an Ori when you can force her to Q through minions and lose her damage anyways? So the negative 30% flat probably isn't as big of a deal as we think it is. The only time I think it's actually a negative is if you're team fighting. Because if I hit 3 people with a Q, I'm losing out on significantly more damage with this new variation. Because you'll only do negative 10 to the second target, negative 20 to the third target, but now I'm losing 30% damage just because I'm hitting additional champions. But maybe the lane phase will make up for that, and most of all, like, the Q is used as a repositioning tool so that you can cast W and cast R. So it's not really a big thing to lose damage on the Q, but it's significantly part of the problem why Orianna is so weak right now is her damage output in lane phase, and her damage output in general is just kind of lackluster compared to things like Kassadin, Ryze, and Syndra. There's really no reason to pick Orianna over Syndra right now, because her damage output is just 10x what Ori can dish out, and her utility isn't really strong enough to justify picking Ori over Syndra, because Syndra at least has a stun and a magnificent slow on her E and W. Ori can speed up her teammates, she can give them armor MR, she can give them shields, but it's just not enough bang for your buck, especially in a meta that's determined by bruiser tanks and high mobility champions. So it feels very bad to play Ori right now because you just can't climb. You're playing a utility champion and a meta where you get penalized for doing so. So it's kind of not a great fix to her damage problem, but it definitely will make the changes, or it'll just make the gameplay a little bit more interactive, I feel like. Now, the next 2 things are straight up just buffs. W mana cost reduced by 20 at max rank, which is significant, right? Because it does mean that when you are casting spells, you're not running out as mana as quickly. And what this does give us an opportunity to do is potentially build a second damage item. So if you were to do Luden, Sorks into Shadow Flame, you would run out of mana pretty quickly, unless you're sitting on a tier or something like that. But the reason why you got to remember is that when you're casting Q and W, it's a 3-second cooldown on your Q, it's a 4-second cooldown on your W. So when you're casting upwards of, if we take a look at this real quick, it's 50 mana plus 110. So every single time you cast QW, it's 160 mana. But now it's going to be 140, which means that you can cast probably 5-6 more combos when you're sitting on 3000 mana. So it's significant. It actually makes a big difference because if I now go double damage items, I'm not running out of mana as quickly, and with the changes to the Q for wave clear, you can actually QEQ and save mana that way, so you're not getting penalized for doing a damage build with Ori, which might solve the problem. It might really solve the problem just by having access to item diversity. Now, the next thing is her ultimate. The best part of Orianna is casting ultimate Shockwave. The amount of moments we've seen in pro play and just any casual clip, it's the Shockwave. 50 base damage increase, which is significant because if you do QWR into an EQW again, you kill somebody early on with additional 60-70 damage if you're including the extra AP ratio. And at max rank, you're getting an additional 100 damage and that 10% AP. So if we're at level 16 with like maybe 500 AP, you're just getting another 50 damage. So you're getting 150 extra damage in your ultimate, and if you hit 5 people with it, that's 500 plus 250. You're getting 750 damage increase just from the ult buff, which is significant. It's a crazy thing. Now, we all know the reason why mages are kind of blah is because every champion has access to Force of Nature, Mon, a bunch of other bullshit items. But this is really good. This is really, really good for Orianna, and this definitely gives her more power. And I think this could be fun. I just think we need to go into PBE as a collective, as a community, look at the Q changes and see how they do damage-wise. Think about the wave clear ramifications of it, the repercussions for that. Because if we can fast push these waves for significantly less mana, it's going to make side laning and just laning in general a lot easier to do because we're not going to get forced out of lane in really wonky situations as much. Now, another question I had here is, also with the reduced mana cost of W, would consider maxing that instead of Q. So let's kind of take a quick look at Orianna. It's a good question. So when we think about Q versus W, the main thing is really just the cooldown. So when I max my Q, it goes from a 6-second cooldown to a 3-second cooldown. When I max my W, it goes from a 7 to a 7. Now, the damage increase on command dissonance is definitely higher just because the damage is 100%, and the AP ratio is 20% higher. It does increase the move speed slow and the move speed up for yourself and your allies. But the whole point of Orianna and her champion identity is about repositioning the command attack so that you can hit people with command dissonance or with command shockwave. So that's why we put points into Q, so that we can constantly move the ball around. Because it doesn't matter if you have points into command dissonance if you miss your Q. Now obviously that's kind of a bullshit, like, what if scenario, but the reality is that you can't always land your Q, so being able to reposition it, because if I keep this at 6-second cooldown, and I Q, I have to wait another 6 seconds to use my command dissonance. Whereas if I cast this every 3 seconds, I can more realistically use my command dissonance. So that's pretty much the viewpoint behind Orianna, is that you're really focused on moving the ball around, constantly using it as a zoning tool, putting pressure on people. With the Q changes and the pass-through damage, you are probably going to get more damage realistically, so it's not going to be as bad for DPS. But you can definitely consider putting maybe 2 points into command dissonance early. I think it just depends on how they do the mana, because if they're going to make it 70 through 90, are they going to spread that out over the 5 levels? And that's kind of what I'm assuming, so it's going to be cheaper at lower ranks, so it's going to be a little bit better early on, not as mana intensive it was. So I'd assume it would probably be like 75, 80, 85, 90 is what they're going to end up doing. Which is, it's pretty good. It definitely 5 mana does go a long way, especially when you're casting so often on Orianna. Because you have probably about 2,000 mana once you finish Mythic, if you have tier and stuff like that. But I think we're going to still continue to max Q just because that is the bread and butter of Orianna. But good question. Thanks for asking. If you like the video, just subscribe or like or leave a comment. Just do something.